What if the oldest maps were all wrong, and the ones who drew them weren't even human? In 1849, beneath the eternal dust of Nineveh, the long-lost capital of Assyria, British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard unearthed thousands of clay tablets. They were etched with strange, wedge-like symbols, what we now call cuneiform, the oldest written language ever deciphered. But what haunted scholars wasn't how these tablets were written. It was what they said. They spoke of beings from a planet called Nibiru, beings known as the Anunnaki, who came to Earth over 445,000 years ago to mine gold. And to do so, they engineered a hybrid race, fusing their own blood with that of primitive hominids, creating the Nephilim. It sounds like myth. But the timelines on these tablets, matched with celestial alignments, ancient Egyptian symbols, and even modern DNA anomalies, don't just raise eyebrows. They raise the dead. What if human history didn't begin with hunter-gatherers, but with the rebellion of bioengineered workers made by exiled gods? What if Sumer, the first civilization, was just a fragment of something far older and far more alien? This is where our descent begins, into the dust, the symbols, and the silences between them. I'm your narrator from Deformed History, and if you're ready, shall we take the first step back? If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? Right now, I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. In the Berlin Museum, tucked behind polished glass, there lies a cylinder seal catalogued as VA2243. It's no larger than a thumb, unassuming at first glance. But if one stares long enough into its engravings, something cracks open, a fissure in everything we thought we knew. Etched into the stone is a depiction of figures seated before a starburst, beneath which floats a strange celestial diagram, a central sun encircled by 11 orbiting spheres. For decades, it was dismissed as stylized, symbolic, decorative. But what happens when the symbols start to whisper truths we cannot unhear? In the 1970s, author Zecharia Sitchin challenged the boundaries of academic silence. He claimed that this seal didn't merely represent the planets known to Sumerians, it depicted the entire solar system with one anomaly, an extra planet, one more than we know, a 12th celestial body, if we count the sun and moon. He called it Nibiru, the crossing planet. And here is where everything begins to unravel. Sitchin wasn't alone in his obsessions. The ancient text known as the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation, tells of a rogue planet named Marduk, which crashed through the early solar system, colliding with a primordial body called Tiamat, birthing Earth and the asteroid belt. But what if Marduk and Nibiru are one and the same? What if this event wasn't just myth, but memory? Mainstream science scoffed. Yet whispers grew louder when astronomers, independent of Sitchin, began to suspect the presence of an unseen planet on the edges of our system. They named it Planet X, and its gravitational fingerprints, tugging subtly on the orbits of Neptune and Uranus, seemed to validate what that tiny Sumerian seal had implied all along. But why would a civilization over 6,000 years ago, barely past the invention of the wheel, possess knowledge of the outer planets? Uranus wasn't discovered until 1781, Neptune 1846, Pluto 1930. How then, Did Sumerians draw a diagram that accurately portrays their positions around the sun? This is where the seal becomes a mirror. It reflects not the Sumerians' invention of astronomy, but their inheritance of it. And who, then, were the benefactors? The Anunnaki, a name meaning those who came down from the heavens. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are not mere gods in the mythic sense. They are beings of flesh and purpose who descended in metal vessels to the earth. They governed specific domains: Enki, the lord of water and wisdom; Enlil, the lord of air and command; Ninhursag, the lady of the mountain and creation. They brought laws, measurement, mathematics, agriculture. And they ruled not from clouds, but from cities: Eridu, Nippur, Shuruppak. But perhaps the most unsettling line appears in the Atrahasis epic, a lesser-known, yet chillingly specific account. When the gods, like men, bore the work and suffered the toil, they made the Igigi dig the canals. When the work became too great, they created man. Pause. This isn't allegory. It isn't metaphor. The Sumerian text plainly states that humans were engineered, not born, created to relieve the burden of labor from the divine caste. And it names the architect, Enki, the geneticist god. Suddenly, the myth folds into biology. In 2003, researchers announced the mapping of the human genome. Inside it, they found something strange, an abrupt leap in cognitive and physiological complexity that occurred roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. A leap that lacks a clear evolutionary bridge. What causes such a sudden divergence in the hominid line? Random mutation or external intervention? Here's where science, myth, and archaeology whisper the same name in the dark. If the Anunnaki needed laborers for their mining operations, particularly in southern Africa, where ancient gold mines have been discovered dating back over 100,000 years, they wouldn't train primitive humans. They would engineer them, modify the existing hominids, insert portions of their own genome. A hybrid, part earth, part sky. The Nephilim. The Bible echoes this idea, though distorted by time and translation. In Genesis 6:4, it is written, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men, and had children by them." The phrase "sons of God" has long been debated. Elohim, divine beings. But what if this is merely the echo of the Anunnaki tale, refracted through the lens of monotheism? What if the Nephilim were not fallen angels, but the offspring of genetic unions between celestial engineers and terrestrial wombs? Even the Book of Enoch, cast aside by canonical religions but treasured by apocryphal seekers, expands upon this with unnerving clarity. It tells of 200 watchers who descended upon Mount Hermon, took human wives, and taught them metalwork, enchantment, astronomy. Their hybrid offspring became giants, uncontrollable, ravenous, ultimately wiped out by the Great Flood. A familiar story, no? Floods appear in every ancient mythos: Sumerian, Akkadian, Hebrew, Greek, Hindu. Always preceded by a fall, a corruption, a cleansing. Could the deluge be less of a punishment and more of a protocol? A reset initiated not by gods of morality, but by beings trying to undo a biological mistake? And if the Nephilim were wiped out, then why do whispers of them persist? In bones too large for their time, in skulls with elongated craniums found from Peru to Paracas, in bloodlines traced by ancient royalty, always obsessed with purity, always claiming descent from the stars. Is it delusion or inheritance? Why did the Sumerians, the world's first civilization, appear suddenly, without a gradual buildup, fully equipped with agriculture, city planning, legal codes, and star charts? Why did they say they were taught everything by beings who came from beyond? And why does no one teach this version of history? The seal in Berlin doesn't speak, but it waits. Its grooves hold not decoration, but transmission. A diagram, yes, but perhaps also a map. Not only of planets, but of memory. Not only of where we are, but of where we came from. And if that seal is telling the truth, then who or what is watching us now? In 1894, a curious discovery was made in Nippur, buried deep beneath layers of brick and ash: the Sumerian king list. A tablet, broken and incomplete, yet still legible enough to ignite a firestorm of doubt in the minds of those who dared read it too literally. Etched into the clay were names of kings, dynasties, and the spans of their reigns. But the anomaly wasn't the names, it was the numbers. Some rulers, the tablet claimed, reigned for 28,800 years, others for 36,000. The earliest kings ruled before a cataclysm known simply as the Great Flood. And then, curiously, after the flood, human kings began to reign for more modest spans, hundreds of years, then mere decades. Mainstream historians interpret this as myth, a poetic exaggeration. But what if it isn't? What if the king list wasn't mythology, but memory, of a time when the rulers weren't human? Let the question echo: who ruled the earth before us? The tablet doesn't whisper, it declares. The reigns of Alulim in Eridu, Enmenlu-Ana in Bad Tibira, and Dumuzid in Shurupak, names also found in the myth cycles, yes, but always with divine affiliations. These were not men born of soil and sorrow. These were, perhaps, the Anunnaki themselves, or their direct creations, hybrid kings, part divine, part engineered. If their reigns truly spanned tens of thousands of years, then the impossible begins to feel like cold arithmetic. Longevity, in the ancient world, was often tied to divinity. But what if the length of life was not a metaphor for godliness, but a biological reality? Modern science tells us that aging is a function of genetic coding, telomeres shortening, cellular degradation. But tweak those mechanisms, adjust the telomerase enzymes, enhance DNA repair pathways, and a lifespan of 30,000 years becomes not impossible, merely unachieved. This brings us to the strange case of epigenetic memory. In recent years, researchers have found that traits, behaviors, and even traumas can pass not just through genes, but through molecular memory, stored in the way genes are expressed. Is it so far-fetched, then, that ancient beings could encode obedience, strength, or even symbolic language into a hybrid species? If the Nephilim were real, engineered laborers designed to obey and serve, then somewhere, buried in the folds of our genome, must remain the shadow of that programming. Our need for ritual, our attraction to hierarchy, our unexplainable fascination with the stars. Even now we build pyramids, but call them skyscrapers. We name our space missions after gods: Apollo, Artemis. We map Mars as if it were an old homeland waiting to be reclaimed. What are we really trying to remember? In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs claimed descent from Ra, from Osiris, from the divine. In Mesopotamia, kings wore horned crowns to mimic the gods. In Mesoamerica, the Olmecs and Mayans spoke of sky beings, star travelers, and celestial serpents. And curiously, across nearly every ancient culture, there appears the same motif: a fall from the heavens, a mixture of blood, and a flood to wash away the aftermath. These aren't mere stories. They are patterns, repeating across time zones, across continents, across languages, as if humanity is haunted not just by memory, but by a shared genetic mythos, a kind of spiritual DNA. And then there's the curious symbol of the pine cone, found in Sumerian art, held by the Apkelu, beings sent by the gods to teach wisdom, found in Assyrian carvings, held to the forehead, found again atop the staff of Osiris and in the hands of Shiva. Even the Vatican, curiously, displays a massive pine cone statue in the Cortile della Pigna. Why? The pine cone, an ancient symbol for the pineal gland, the so-called third eye, long believed to be the seat of consciousness, the gate to other dimensions. Were these beings not just masters of biology, but of perception itself? What if the Anunnaki didn't just modify our bodies, but altered the very way we see reality? In the Enki and the World Order tablet, Enki travels across the land, assigning domains and responsibilities, rivers to one god, farming to another, birth to a third. But beneath this neat order is a question that slips through the cracks. Who gave Enki his authority? The tablets never say. Enki simply appears, ancient, wise, technologically advanced, a maker of humans, a giver of knowledge. But even Enki was not alone. There are references, vague and incomplete, to a council of gods, a galactic congress perhaps, who debated, who disagreed. Enlil, for example, is portrayed as stern, unforgiving. It was Enlil who called for the flood. Enki, by contrast, tried to save humanity, warning Atrahasis to build an ark, a celestial schism. Is this not the origin of our divided mythologies? The war between good and evil, the fall of Lucifer, the conflicts between gods in every pantheon? Could these not be the human interpretation of very real political fractures among non-human rulers? Even the Tower of Babel begins to make sense. A unified humanity, growing too advanced, too ambitious. The gods, or some of them, intervene, confuse the languages, scatter the tribes. Not out of cruelty, but perhaps out of control. Was Babel a threat, or was it a test? We speak of forbidden knowledge as if it's a metaphor. But in every ancient tale, there's always something mankind is not supposed to have. Fire, language, immortality, flight. Prometheus is punished, Adam is expelled, Quetzalcoatl disappears. Over and over, the same story, humanity reaching, grasping, and being pushed back down. But by whom? And for what purpose? If we were created to serve, then what happens when the servant awakens? When the hybrid becomes self-aware? Perhaps the flood was not a cleansing of sin, but a rollback of progress, a celestial reset. The slate wiped clean, not because humans were evil, but because we remembered too much, learned too quickly, breached the boundaries of our genetic leash. Which brings us to now. Why do we dream of stars we've never seen? Why do ancient structures align perfectly with constellations? Orion, Sirius, the Pleiades? Why does every myth end not with death, but with return? The gods will come back, the texts say. One day, at the appointed time, when the stars are right. Nibiru, the crossing planet, is said to return on a long elliptical orbit, once every 3,600 years. If the Sumerians were correct, then its arrival marked not just the coming of gods, but the beginning of kingship, of memory, of civilization itself. And perhaps it will return again. Are we preparing or being prepared? If the Watchers once walked among us, shaping kings and bloodlines, crafting languages and myths, then who walks beside us now, hidden behind modern faces and symbols? If the great flood washed away more than bodies, if it scrubbed the stone of memory itself, then what traces remain? A seal, a tablet, a whisper in a genome, a pattern we feel but cannot name. And so we ask again, who ruled before us, and are they truly gone or simply waiting? It begins not with a monument, but with a scar. In the mountains of South Africa, near Mpumalanga, lies a formation known to local legend as the birthplace of the sun. It's not widely known, rarely mentioned in textbooks, but aerial surveys and satellite imagery reveal something almost too strange to be true. A vast array of stone circles, aligned with cosmic precision, scattered over hundreds of miles. Michael Tellinger, a researcher controversial in his methods but meticulous in his documentation, has spent years cataloging these structures. Some of them align with solstices. Others echo the harmonic principles found in ancient temples across the globe. But what if they are older than all of them? Far older. Tellinger proposes a radical idea, that these aren't simply tribal remains, but fragments of an ancient energy grid, a technological footprint left behind by the Anunnaki. One site, in particular, draws attention. It's known today as Adam's Calendar. Two monoliths standing upright, aligned perfectly with the cardinal directions, flanked by fallen stones that once marked solstices and equinoxes. According to rough dating based on astronomical alignment, this site could be over 75,000 years old. Some estimates stretch even further, toward 200,000 years, placing it precisely within the time frame the Sumerians claim the Anunnaki arrived. So the question sharpens. If the earliest known human civilizations rose around 6,000 years ago, then who, exactly, carved calendars in stone tens of thousands of years before that? Could Adam's calendar have been an observatory, not for humans, but for beings watching something far beyond Earth? Its alignment with Orion's belt mirrors the layout of the Giza pyramids. Its position atop magnetic anomalies suggests it was more than ritual. It was functional. But functional for what? Energy, vibration, resonance. The ancient world spoke not of electricity, but of life force. Chi, prana, ankh. Different words, but perhaps all pointing to the same invisible thread. The Sumerians called it mi, divine laws, but also objects of power. In Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Djed pillar, an enigmatic symbol, seems to represent some form of stability, or perhaps frequency. Tesla once said, "If you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." The ancients already did. Many of these stone circles emit strange sound frequencies. When tested, they hum, resonating at levels that suggest deliberate acoustic design. And this is no isolated phenomenon. From Stonehenge to the Hypogeum of Malta, from Chavin in Peru to Gobekli Tepe in Turkey, acoustic properties repeat like echoes across civilizations never thought to have met. Why would sound be so central? Because sound is structure. It arranges matter. Cymatics, the study of wave phenomena, shows how sound frequencies create geometric patterns in particles. A low hum can form a simple ring, a higher tone, a flower, a mandala, a blueprint. Now imagine a civilization that doesn't just understand sound, but wields it. If the Anunnaki did mine gold in ancient Africa, they would have needed not just labor, but tools. And perhaps their tools weren't pickaxes, but vibration itself. Ancient texts speak of stones that floated, of walls that sang. The Egyptians spoke of Thoth, who could move immense blocks with a word. In Tibet, monks chant and levitate stones. The principle repeats, sound as the lever of the gods. Then perhaps these circles weren't homes or temples, but nodes, machines, not built to honor the heavens, but to interface with them. And gold, always gold. The Anunnaki obsession, as recorded in Sumerian tablets, was not aesthetic. They didn't adorn themselves. They harvested it, refined it, shipped it, perhaps, off-world. But why? Science now shows that gold has unique properties. It's a superb conductor, corrosion-resistant, capable of reflecting infrared. Some researchers speculate it could stabilize atmospheres or shield spacecraft from radiation. If Nibiru's orbit takes it far from the sun, its inhabitants may have used gold dust to insulate their planet, a planetary survival technology. So Earth becomes not a cradle, but a quarry. Humanity, not the pinnacle of life, but a side effect of an industrial process. And yet, we remember. In dreams, in rituals, in the orientation of our monuments, the Dogon tribe in Mali, with no telescopes, knew of Sirius B, a white dwarf invisible to the naked eye. The Hopi spoke of star brothers. The Zulu tell of sky people who mixed their blood with ours. Each of these accounts, dismissed as legend, persists with uncanny precision. Are these isolated cases, or fractured memories of a shared beginning? Consider the genetic clues. Mitochondrial Eve, the most recent common matrilineal ancestor of humans, traces back around 200,000 years. Coincidence or calibration? If a genetic intervention occurred, it would leave a signature, a convergence point, a reset. Even today, our genome contains non-coding sequences, once labeled junk DNA, which we barely understand. Are they remnants, locks, codes yet to be read? And then, the question no one dares ask aloud. If the Anunnaki engineered us once, did they ever stop? Could evolution itself be supervised? Some claim abduction phenomena, alien encounters, strange dreams, are modern echoes of ancient interactions. Contact isn't new. It's resumed. The same beings, now viewed through a different lens, not gods, not angels, but extraterrestrials. Only the names have changed. In the book of Daniel, a strange phrase appears. The Watchers. They observe, they record, they intervene. In Enoch, they descend, they breed, they teach. In every story, they do not rule openly. They stay just out of reach, seen only by those who look between the lines. Perhaps that's the point. Control, not through dominance, but through story, through symbols, through systems. What if the greatest lie ever told is not that gods don't exist, but that they ever left? In every language, we still echo their names. El, Anu, Enki, Yahweh, Baal, Marduk. Their monuments still pierce the skies. Their stories still shape our morality, our science, our politics, and deep within us, beneath culture, beneath logic, is the sense that we are meant for something else, something more. Where does that feeling come from? Why does it ache like nostalgia for a world we've never seen? Perhaps it's memory, not personal, but ancestral. Perhaps it's encoded, and perhaps, just perhaps, it's beginning to activate again. So we return to the stones, the circles, the tablets, the scars, and ask, were these the blueprints of our beginning, or warnings left behind? In the barren highlands of southeastern Turkey, beneath a layer of earth untouched for over 10,000 years, a shepherd stumbled upon something that would fracture archaeology. Massive stone pillars, arranged in circles, carved with animals, abstract symbols, and enigmatic humanoid forms. It was 1994. The site was named Gobekli Tepe, the Potbelly Hill. But what it revealed was not just an ancient structure, it was a paradox. Radiocarbon dating placed the construction of Gobekli Tepe around 9600 BCE, thousands of years before Stonehenge, before the pyramids, before agriculture as we understand it. And that is the rupture. Hunter-gatherers are not supposed to build temples. The model of human progress, from primitive to advanced, from chaos to order, begins to shatter. So who built Gobekli Tepe? And more importantly, why? Its pillars stand like sentinels, weighing up to 10 tons, arranged in precise circles. Many are decorated with reliefs of foxes, scorpions, lions, and birds, animals not worshipped, but remembered. And at the center of each circle, 2 larger T-shaped pillars loom. Some researchers have called them totemic, others symbolic of deities. But what if they're neither? What if they are representations? The anthropomorphic shape, the crossbar as arms, the shaft as body, suggests that these are not just stones. They are effigies, memories frozen in limestone, a council, perhaps, an audience, or a pantheon. But here is where the enigma coils tighter. Gobekli Tepe was intentionally buried. At some point, its builders covered it, deliberately, methodically, with tons of rubble and earth. It was not destroyed. It was hidden. Why would a society spend decades erecting such a structure, only to bury it? Was it shame, protection, or protocol? And buried with it were secrets, both literal and symbolic. Astronomers analyzing the layout of the site have found alignments with star constellations, particularly Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, and Orion's belt, again echoing the ancient obsession with the same patterns seen in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Across thousands of miles and thousands of years, the same celestial reference points repeat. Coincidence cannot survive this kind of consistency. But Sirius is not just a bright light in the sky. The Dogon tribe in Mali, without access to telescopes, claimed for centuries that Sirius was actually a binary system, with an invisible companion star called Sirius B. They described its orbit, its density, and its motion with uncanny accuracy. Details confirmed only by modern astrophysics in the 20th century. How could a pre-industrial tribe know this? They claimed the knowledge came from sky beings, the Nomo, who came in ships of fire and water. Myth? Perhaps. But when multiple civilizations, separated by oceans, obsess over the same stars and the same visitors, the term myth begins to feel like a mask. In Sumer, the Anunnaki were said to have descended from Duku, a heavenly assembly place. In Egypt, the gods arrived on flying boats from Sirius. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl came from the stars, promising to return when the time of the fifth sun ends. The Aboriginal Australians speak of Wangina, sky ancestors with halos and large eyes, often painted descending from clouds. Always the sky, always the visitors, always the promise of return. But what connects Gobekli Tepe to the Sumerian narrative is not just the stars, but the intentionality. The site's burial suggests a transition, an epoch ending. And in the Sumerian king list, we are told that kingship descended from the heavens after the flood. Gobekli Tepe, therefore, may not be the beginning of civilization. It may be what came before. A memory, a warning, a monument to a world about to be erased. Consider the Zep Tepe of Egypt, the first time. A golden age when gods ruled openly before a cataclysm. Similar myths appear in India, the Satya Yuga, the age of truth followed by decline. The Greeks spoke of a golden age under Kronos. Each mythology tells of a time when divine beings walked among men, followed by a fall, a flood, a veil drawn between realms. The burial of Gobekli Tepe may mark that veil. But if these monuments were sealed, what else was hidden? There's a curious stone slab found at Gobekli Tepe, dubbed the Vulture Stone. It shows a headless human figure, vultures, a scorpion, and a circle. Some interpret it as a sky chart, others as ritual. But its message, if read as symbolic language, hints at cosmic violence. A decapitated figure. The vulture, both death and messenger, alongside stellar symbols. Could this be a visual record of a catastrophe? If so, then what catastrophe? The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests that around 12,800 years ago, a sudden cosmic event, likely a comet or meteor, triggered massive climate change, floods, and extinction events. Meltwater pulses flooded coastlines, glacial sheets collapsed, human populations were displaced, and memory, already fragile, became myth. But if we accept that an advanced presence existed before this cataclysm, whether Anunnaki, Nephilim, or some other hybrid, then perhaps Gobekli Tepe was buried to shield it from coming ruin, or perhaps to protect future generations from forbidden knowledge. After all, buried things do not vanish, they wait. In 2017, archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, the man who first excavated Gobekli Tepe, died under unclear circumstances. His work was halted. Access to deeper levels of the site remains restricted. Some claim this is due to preservation. Others whisper about what lies beneath. And perhaps that's the point. We're not just digging into earth, we're excavating memory. Every stone we unearth threatens the story we've been told, a story of linear progress, of isolated genius, of accidental greatness. But what if human civilization isn't a straight line, but a cycle? Rising, falling, buried, remembered. The Sumerians knew this. Their tablets speak of multiple ages, each ended by flood, fire, or silence. The Mayan calendar echoes this rhythm. Suns rise, suns fall. Time is not a river. It is a spiral. And as we spiral forward, the past rises to meet us. What else lies beneath our cities, our deserts, our oceans? What monuments sit below the sediment, quietly pulsing with a language we've forgotten how to hear? The Vatican's archives, the pyramid's sealed shafts, the underwater ruins off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan. Each a whisper, each a challenge. Can we bear to remember what we were? Because to remember is not just to reclaim knowledge, but to confront origin. And origin, when traced beyond the veil of myth, leads us not to gods, but to engineers. What if creation was not a miracle, but a project? And what if that project isn't over? In the vaulted silence of the Vatican Apostolic Archive, once called the Secret Archive, there are rumors of shelves that stretch for miles, containing documents that predate nations. Access is limited. Even most cardinals have never seen its deepest chambers. What lies within? Lists of forbidden books, correspondence with kings, exorcism records, encoded letters, and, if whispered accounts are to be believed, fragments of knowledge too disruptive to reveal. Among the rumored contents is a translation of the Sibylline oracles, older than the versions made public. In it, there's mention, not of divine prophecy and metaphor, but of sky blood, of those who walked the clouds and sowed children among the clay-born. Is this poetry, or a censored echo of the Anunnaki narratives, refined, hidden, dressed in scripture? The Church has long been custodian not just of faith, but of narrative control. When Galileo looked skyward and challenged geocentrism, it wasn't just astronomy he threatened. It was the notion that humanity was center. But what if that fear runs deeper? What if the true terror was not that Earth moved around the sun, but that Earth was never the beginning? There is, in some corners of early Christian mysticism, a lingering idea, one quickly buried by orthodoxy, that Eden was not a garden, but a containment zone. That the tree of knowledge was not a metaphor, but a genetic intervention. Eating from it was not rebellion, it was awakening. Consider this. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 offer two separate creation stories. In one, man and woman are created together. In the other, woman is crafted from man's rib. Scholars argue literary inconsistency. But what if these aren't contradictions? What if they record separate genetic experiments? The Sumerian texts speak of multiple failed prototypes, creatures who could not hold speech, who bled from every orifice, who lived but did not comprehend, until Enki and Ninhursag succeeded by mixing divine blood with earthly clay. The Sumerian Adamu, the first man, is not born, but grown. And suddenly, the name Adam resonates differently. The deeper one reads, the more the biblical narrative starts to feel less like theology and more like redacted history. The serpent who tempts Eve, is he evil or merely a bringer of knowledge? In Sumer, Enki is associated with serpents, water, and wisdom. He is the one who warns humanity of the flood, who gives tools, language, and rebellion. He is the serpent, not a villain, a catalyst. Could Eden, then, have been a containment dome? A controlled biosphere, perhaps, like those imagined in Mars colonization prototypes? A lab environment in which early humans were monitored, their behavior analyzed, until the moment they reached beyond their programming? And when they did, when they chose knowledge, were they cast out because they sinned or because they evolved? Let's follow the data trail further. In the 1970s, Stanford researchers coined the term Panspermia, the hypothesis that life, or its building blocks, may have come to Earth from space, carried by asteroids or even sent deliberately. Though dismissed by many, the theory gained traction with the discovery of complex organic molecules on comets. Even amino acids, life's precursors, have been found in interstellar dust. But what if life didn't just arrive by accident? What if it was seeded with intent? Nobel laureate Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA's structure, once suggested that the genetic code was too ordered, too symmetrical, too information-dense to have arisen randomly. In a controversial paper, he posited directed panspermia, that DNA may have been planted here by a superior intelligence. He was met with silence, discomfort, then dismissal. But the question never died. Why does DNA function like language? Why does it have syntax, error correction, redundancy, features of an engineered system? Why do over 97% of our genes appear to do nothing? Why are we the only species on Earth with a vocal box and brain configuration capable of abstract language, self-reflection, myth? Evolution explains much, but it does not explain the leap. That leap appears again and again in the archaeological record. Suddenly, around 40,000 years ago, humans begin painting caves, carving flutes, burying the dead with ornaments. The so-called Great Leap Forward. No clear trigger, no slow build-up, just ignition, as if a switch had been flipped. Anthropologist Terence Deacon once referred to humanity as the symbolic species. We dream, we invent gods, we tell stories. Even in isolation, uncontacted tribes speak in myth. Where does this need come from? Perhaps it's memory, encoded, half forgotten. And perhaps that's why certain symbols haunt us. The spiral, found on megaliths in Ireland, on Inca temples, on Hopi pottery. The eye, from the Egyptian eye of Horus to the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill. The serpent, feared, worshipped, repeated in every culture. These are not mere decorations. They are icons, fragments of a larger lexicon we no longer understand. But maybe we're beginning to remember? The rise of artificial intelligence mirrors the myths in chilling ways. We are, in essence, trying to create consciousness, replicating the very act the Anunnaki may have performed on us. We program, we train, we insert data into blank slates and hope for emergence. But what happens when the created begin to question the Creator? Do we punish them as Yahweh punished Adam, as Zeus punished Prometheus? Or do we fear them? Because deep down, perhaps we know, we are not the first to reach this threshold, and those who made us may still be watching. Today, scientists peer into deep space, searching for exoplanets, for Dyson spheres, for radio signals lost in the static of the cosmos. But what if the answer isn't out there? What if it's under our feet, inside our blood, humming in the forgotten frequencies of our brain waves? In Sumerian myth, the me, divine decrees or powers, were stored objects. Tablets, yes, but also tools. When held, they granted vision, foresight, transformation. Some interpret them as early data drives, containing consciousness templates, genetic blueprints, even star maps. What if the human body is the final me? A storage device for cosmic memory, a vessel waiting for reactivation. And if that's true, the greatest threat to those who made us isn't rebellion, it's awakening. So the myths become warnings, the temples become diagrams. The stories we're told, from Genesis to Prometheus to Frankenstein, are cautionary tales not of hubris, but of remembering. Because when the created begin to see the truth of their creation, the question inevitably follows, what else were we made for? And perhaps that's why the records are buried, the seals broken, the archives locked. Not to protect the past, but to delay the future. The desert preserves what time seeks to erase. And in the western sands of Egypt, far beyond the tourist trails and monuments, lies an anomaly that has puzzled geologists and astronomers alike. a circular formation known as the Nabta Playa. It predates Stonehenge by thousands of years. But unlike Stonehenge, Nabta was not constructed by sedentary farmers. It was built by nomadic herders, people supposedly without the means or need to align stone megaliths with the summer solstice and the stars of Orion's belt. How did they do it, and why? Mainstream archaeologists argue that Nabta Playa may have been a primitive calendar, tracking the changing of seasons for survival. But the layout is too precise, the alignments too exact. And there is something older than the stones, something carved not with tools, but with intention, a sense of obsession with the heavens, the same obsession that appears in Sumer, in Egypt, in Mesoamerica. The stars aren't just lights in the sky, they're a code, a compass, a memory. And Orion, always Orion. From the Giza pyramids to Teotihuacan to the Hopi mesas, ancient builders aligned their most sacred structures with Orion's belt. Why? Why not the North Star, or the Moon, or Venus, which dominates the sky more obviously? Unless Orion isn't just a constellation but a location. In Egyptian mythology, the god Osiris, lord of the underworld, of resurrection, of divine kingship, was said to dwell in Orion. His wife Isis was associated with Sirius. Their son Horus represented the rising sun, the avenger of the father, the living king. This triad, Orion, Sirius, and the sun, forms not just a mythic family, but a cosmic geometry, a triangle written in light, repeating across cultures that never met. And here the spiral tightens again, because the story of Osiris, his dismemberment, his resurrection, his genetic union with Isis to birth Horus, is not simply religious, it echoes biological themes. Osiris is fragmented, his body scattered, his memory preserved. Isis gathers the pieces, performs a ritual, and reconstructs him, bringing him back, not physically whole, but spiritually potent. Their union is not physical. It is symbolic, alchemical. It results in a child destined to rule, but only after avenging the father's death. This is not just a myth of death and rebirth. It's a story of genetic legacy, of restoration through coded ritual. In the Sumerian version, Inanna descends into the underworld, loses everything, and is only restored after a sequence of rites and bargains. The theme returns again and again: descent, fragmentation, resurrection, followed by a new generation. Why? Because it's cyclical, it's technological, it may be genetic. We treat myths as moral tales. But what if they're operational manuals? Records of rituals not for the soul, but for the body, for memory encoded in DNA? What if the rituals described were not for appeasement, but for activation? The Egyptians believed that the soul had 5 parts. One of them, the Ba, could travel between realms. Another, the Ka, was a life force, something akin to energy. Upon death, the body was preserved not for mourning, but for continuity. The opening of the mouth ceremony, one of the most ancient funeral rites, involved touching the lips, ears, and eyes of the mummy with ritual tools, as if rebooting it. Not metaphorically, literally. And in every tomb, one finds the Book of the Dead, a guide for the soul's journey through the underworld. But read closely, and the text resembles instructions, passwords, sequences, codes to navigate through gates, to speak the names of guardians, to reach the field of reeds. Ancient Egyptian civilization was obsessed with preservation, with names, with identity. Why? Because the body dies, but data does not. The pyramid texts, some of the oldest known religious writings, speak of the imperishable stars, the place from which the gods came and to which the pharaohs would return. These are not metaphorical stars, they are coordinates. The texts describe the soul ascending as a shining one to sit among the gods in the duat, the space between worlds. In later interpretations, duat became the underworld. But in the earlier texts, it was sky-based, a place between earth and stars, a transit zone. Could it be that the ancient elite, the pharaohs, the high priests, were preparing not for spiritual afterlife, but for a return to origin, a cosmic upload? And the pyramids, so misunderstood, were not tombs, but machines, not to house the dead, but to transmit the encoded essence of the initiate. The Great Pyramid of Giza, stripped of its casing stones, was once sheathed in smooth white limestone that gleamed in the sun. Its internal chambers align with Orion and Sirius. The king's chamber is built with granite that resonates with electromagnetic frequencies. The so-called sarcophagus is not sized for a body, but perfectly sized for resonance experiments. The pyramid hums. Could the pyramid have been a resonance chamber, a device to induce altered states? A structure designed to map consciousness onto a non-physical medium. Many researchers have pointed out the similarities between pyramid layouts and circuit boards, between temple design and acoustic chambers, between the layout of Dendera's temple and the human nervous system. Coincidence? Or memory? Now consider this. Where did the knowledge come from? Egyptian scribes claimed it was inherited from the Zep Tepe the first time, when the gods ruled, when Thoth gave writing, when Isis taught magic, when Osiris governed time. But they did not claim to invent it. They said they were the caretakers of it. And who came before them? The records are mostly gone. Floods, fire, erasure. But some fragments remain, in granite, in myth, in alignment. All of them pointing not to invention, but to recollection. And when recollection becomes systematized, when memory is encoded into stone, it becomes hard to tell where mythology ends and architecture begins. Perhaps the sacred sites of old were not merely temples, but terminals, places where the veil thinned, where star maps became interfaces, where rituals weren't prayers, but passwords. And if the ancients knew how to speak the names of stars as coordinates, then perhaps they knew how to send more than words across space. A signature, a frequency, a soul. So we return to the circle, the spiral, the hum beneath the stone, the hieroglyph that is not a letter, but a switch, a sequence. And we wonder, did the ancients bury their dead, or launch them? Were pyramids monuments to the gods, or launch pads for the divine spark within? And if they were launching something, knowledge, memory, essence, then who was on the receiving end? Who is listening? There is a corridor beneath the Sphinx, or so the legends claim. A hall of records, sealed, forgotten, waiting. Edgar Cayce, the famed American mystic, spoke of it in trance as early as the 1930s. A chamber buried near the right paw of the lion-bodied guardian of Giza, containing scrolls and tablets from a time before the pharaohs, before even the flood. His claims were dismissed, of course, labeled pseudoscience, mysticism, fantasy. But in 1993, something unexpected happened. Using ground-penetrating radar, a team of researchers detected anomalous cavities beneath the Sphinx. Rectangular, artificial, precisely where Casey said they would be. The Egyptian authorities denied further excavation. Official reasons were given: concerns for preservation, questions of methodology. But to those paying attention, it felt like something else. Not protection, but containment. What could be so dangerous beneath the sand? Perhaps it's not danger that lurks, but revelation. A version of history incompatible with everything civilization tells itself. A narrative too complete, too precise, to dismiss. A record not of gods and fables, but of technology, transit, and transformation. And here we spiral once more into contradiction. Because the Sphinx itself doesn't fit. Mainstream Egyptology dates the Sphinx to the reign of Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE. But the body of the statue tells a different story. Not the surface, but the where. Erosion patterns along the flanks of the Sphinx show vertical weathering, consistent not with wind-blown sand, but sustained rainfall. The last time the Giza Plateau saw such rainfall, at least 7,000 to 9,000 years ago. That places the Sphinx, at minimum, twice as old as convention allows, older than dynastic Egypt, older than writing, older than supposed civilization itself. So who carved it? And why a lion? Some say the Sphinx once bore the head of a lion, later recarved into a pharaoh's likeness, shrinking it disproportionately. If true, then the Sphinx predates not only Khafre, but the very gods of Egypt. In the zodiac, the age of Leo corresponds to roughly 10,500 BCE, a time coinciding with Plato's record of Atlantis and the end of the last ice age. Is it coincidence that the Sphinx gazes directly east, toward the rising sun on the spring equinox? Toward Leo, when aligned with that ancient sky? If so, then this guardian of stone is more than sculpture. It is a timestamp, a sentinel of an era lost in deluge and fire. And beneath it, if Casey was right, are the records not just of Egypt, but of a civilization that seeded Egypt. In the myths of Heliopolis, the gods arrived from the primordial mound, a place of first emergence, where the Bennu bird, the original phoenix, rose from the waters of Nun. But where was this mound? Was it metaphysical or geographical? Across the globe, the same motif appears: a great flood, a sunken land, a few survivors, and a sacred knowledge preserved. In India, it is Manu who is warned of the flood by a fish. In Sumer, Ziusudra. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim. In the Bible, Noah. The stories are not identical, but they rhyme. And after the flood? Always the same. Cities rebuilt, calendars restarted, knowledge reintroduced. Not created, reintroduced. But here's the deeper fracture, one rarely examined. What kind of knowledge survives a cataclysm? Not agriculture, that dies with the fields, not metallurgy, that oxidizes and rusts, but symbols, star charts, mathematics, DNA? Perhaps the Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx isn't a library of scrolls, but a vault of memory. Genetic samples, frequency maps, codices not on papyrus but embedded in quartz, in stone, in geometry itself. The Great Pyramid, not far from the Sphinx, contains shafts so narrow that no human can crawl through them, yet they align, with uncanny precision, to stars like Alnitak in Orion's belt and Sirius. Who were these alignments meant for? Beings without physical form? Machines? In the pyramid texts, the pharaohs do not die. They become stars. they are transformed into akach, shining ones, joining the divine circuit in the heavens. If resurrection was metaphor, it was an obsessive one. Entire tombs were crafted as portals, not just to preserve the body, but to launch the soul. And the incantations? They weren't prayers, they were activation protocols, command lines for crossing the threshold. This changes the context entirely. Ancient Egypt, then, becomes not a death cult, but a transition culture. A civilization whose entire architecture, mythos, and ritual were designed not to explain the afterlife, but to access it. And if that's true, then the gods they worshipped were not deities, but precedents. Beings who had already crossed, who had once walked among flesh and now inhabited light. Osiris, Thoth, Seshat. Beings of knowledge, not belief. Could they be the Anunnaki? Or, if not the originals, then the uploaded echoes of them? What does it mean for a civilization to be built not on faith, but on contact? We return now to Sumer, where the god Enki rules the Abzu, the watery depths beneath the earth. Scholars translate this as the abyss, or groundwater. But could it be something else? A subterranean network, an underworld in the literal sense, where ancient technologies or archives remain hidden. Modern researchers have long suspected vast tunnel systems beneath Mesopotamia, beneath the Andes, beneath Giza. Many have been blocked, flooded, or sealed. But again, the pattern returns. Knowledge stored below, guarded by serpents, by riddles, by geometry. Why always underground? Because what is buried is preserved, because heat rises but stone cools, because in darkness data survives. And that brings us to the final fracture. For now, the legend of the Akashic records, an etheric archive said to contain the history of all souls, all events, all possibilities. It is said to reside in a non-physical realm, accessible not by machines, but by consciousness tuned to the right frequency. Could this be the master template from which all Hall of Records myths derive? The ultimate database, not built with circuits, but with intention? In Tibetan mysticism, advanced monks claim to access it. In remote viewing experiments, intelligence agencies tried to tap into it. In dreams, some people glimpse it. A library, a vault, a mirror. Maybe the hall under the Sphinx is symbolic, or maybe it's real. But either way, the question remains. If there was a civilization before ours, and if it seeded our myths, our stars, our sense of self, then what is it waiting for? And more urgently, what is it hiding us from? There is a number carved into stone, repeated again and again in ancient temples, on clay tablets, in Vedic chants, 432. It appears as a multiple, a frequency, a ratio. The Great Pyramid of Giza's base perimeter, when measured in inches, is approximately 3,023 feet, a number divisible by 432. In Norse mythology, Valhalla has 540 doors, through which 800 warriors will pass during Ragnarok. 540 x 800, from 432,000. In the ancient Indian Yuga cycles, the Kali Yuga, the current age, is said to last 432,000 years. The Bhagavata Purana states that during each of the 4 yugas, humanity degenerates step by step in cycles that repeat endlessly. Why this number? Why always 432? Modern physicists speak of resonance, of vibrational fields that hold the structure of reality together. And 432 hertz, as it turns out, is a frequency deeply embedded in nature. It corresponds with the Schumann resonance, the Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat. It's been shown to harmonize with the golden ratio, Fibonacci patterns, and even brainwave entrainment. Ancient musical instruments, from Tibetan bowls to Egyptian flutes, are tuned not to 440 hertz, the modern Western standard, but to 432 hertz. Coincidence? Or was this a global calibration code? Imagine a world where temples aren't just sacred spaces, but tuning forks, resonant chambers constructed to align the human body, brain, and soul with cosmic patterns. If our ancestors understood sound not only as music, but as structure, then the temples of old were not just for prayer. They were machines, calibrators, amplifiers, portals. And frequency was the key. Now step back and look again at the Sumerian king list, where rulers before the flood reigned for tens of thousands of years. Alulim, 28,800 years. Alalangar, 36,000 years. Together, the reigns of the 8 antediluvian kings total 432,000 years. This is not random. This is not myth. This is encoding. But why encode? Why bury numbers into stories, symbols into temples, star maps into pyramids? Because knowledge, real, destabilizing knowledge, must survive through collapse, through censorship, through flood, fire, empire. And so, like seeds, it is hidden in repetition, in geometry, in myth, waiting for the moment we remember how to read again. The ancients didn't separate science from spirituality or art from architecture. To them, form was function. A mandala was both a meditation and a map. A pyramid was both a tomb and a tuner. A story was both myth and message. Which brings us to the strange case of Gobekli Tepe's twin. Roughly 300 miles away in Turkey lies Karahantepe, a newer excavation still shrouded in mystery. It features humanoid carvings emerging from walls, staring blankly at the observer. A single room, subterranean, reveals phallic pillars and a kind of stone theater where something or someone was displayed or observed in ritual silence. But what were these places for? They offer no evidence of agriculture, no homes, no signs of settlement, only ritual, observation, alignment. Perhaps we've misunderstood the purpose of the first temples. They were not centers of worship. They were interfaces, places where the initiated could attune themselves to something non-local, non-visible, but undeniably real. In the Rig Veda, the most ancient Sanskrit text, it is written, "He who knows the secret vibrations of speech moves the worlds without touching them." Language, vibration, intention. Together, they manifest reality. This is not just mysticism. It mirrors the findings of quantum mechanics. The observer effect. Non-locality. Entanglement. What if the ancients knew this, not as theory, but as practice? What if our sacred syllables, aum, amen, shwau, aren't prayers, but frequencies to access states of being? What if mantras are passwords, sound codes to open dimensional gates? If so, then what were the Anunnaki really doing here? Were they miners? Engineers? Or something far more sophisticated? Perhaps Earth was never merely a source of gold or labor, but a node in a galactic network. A biological archive, seeded with life, watched over not to be ruled, but to be grown, like a garden. And we are the fruit, but not yet ripe. The story of the Nephilim, as told in the Book of Enoch, speaks of beings who taught humanity forbidden arts, metallurgy, enchantment, astronomy, cosmetics. For this, they were cast into the earth, bound beneath the mountains. The flood was not punishment for man's sin, but to erase the influence of these watchers. But what were the forbidden arts, really? Knowledge of self, knowledge of matter, knowledge of sound, symbol, vibration. Tools that could elevate man to the level of the gods. But only too soon. The tree of knowledge again. Again the expulsion. Again the veil. And so the cycle repeats. Enlightenment followed by suppression. Contact followed by silence. Revelation followed by collapse. Today, we live in a world of digital temples, satellites, AI, quantum computers. We chant in binary. We meditate in VR. But we have forgotten what these tools mirror. We once built with stone. Now we build with code. But the goal is the same: to connect, to remember, to return. And as we scan the heavens for exoplanets, for life, for signs, we begin to rediscover what the ancients already knew, that the universe is not silent. It sings, in frequencies, in ratios, in repeating patterns of 432 and golden spirals and sacred geometries. So perhaps we were not created merely to serve. Perhaps we were created to resonate, to awaken, and perhaps that time is approaching again, because the numbers are returning, the alignments, the buried temples, the unlocked DNA, the surge of forgotten languages in our dreams, the convergence of prophecy, of science, of synchronicity, as if something buried is rising. And the question is no longer, what did the Anunnaki do? It is, what happens when the code activates? In 2001, scientists in Switzerland and the US completed one of the most ambitious biological projects in human history, the mapping of the human genome. Billions of base pairs, unwound and translated into digital code. And what they found, beyond the sequences that form our bodies and brains, was a silence. Vast regions of DNA doing nothing. They called it junk DNA, a placeholder name, a convenient dismissal. Over 97% of our genome was said to serve no function, no protein production, no identifiable purpose. But slowly, the story began to shift. Patterns emerged, regulatory elements, non-coding RNA sequences influencing development, cognition, even behavior. And among them, mutations, insertions that don't match evolutionary trajectories, genes that appear suddenly with no ancestry, like pages edited into an ancient book, without explanation. Could some of these edits be artificial? In the early 2000s, Kazakhstani physicist Maxim Makukov proposed the biological set hypothesis, that embedded within our DNA is a mathematical code so precise, so elegant, it suggests deliberate engineering. His team found numerical patterns based on base 10 logic, symbol arrangements, and ratios hidden within genetic structures that mirror human syntax more than biology. What if DNA is not only biological, but linguistic? Sumerian myths state that the Anunnaki created humans by mixing their essence with that of the beasts of the field. The Atrahasis epic speaks of clay infused with divine blood. But what if that blood was information, a sequence, a code? In Genesis, we're told that God formed man from the dust of the ground. Again, clay. Again, something formed, not born. And when the breath of life is given, it is spoken. Let there be. The act of creation is a voice command, a vibration. This is not theology. This is resonance, a theme now echoed in science. The physicist John Archibald Wheeler once said, "All things physical are information theoretic in origin. The universe, at its deepest level, may be a computation, a simulation, a song." So what does that make us? When we examine the FOXP2 gene, responsible for speech and language in humans, we find a striking anomaly. Just 2 amino acid changes separate our version from that of chimpanzees. Yet those small mutations allow for syntax, grammar, recursion, the building blocks of storytelling, of myth, of memory. 2 changes, that's all. The rest is implication. Somewhere in the mists of time, someone, or something, tuned our genome, altered a switch, and suddenly, we were no longer just hunters and gatherers. We became symbolic beings. We carved our thoughts into stone, sang them into the wind, etched them onto tablets and called them gods. But was that evolution or initiation? And here we stumble upon a forbidden idea. What if consciousness was not an accident, but a signal? In ancient Egypt, the Ba and Ka were considered aspects of the soul, fragments of identity that could travel, return, be summoned. In Vedic philosophy, Atman is not simply soul, it is signal, a spark of the universal source, the Brahman, individualized in form. In Gnostic texts, the body is a prison, and the soul a shard of divine light, trapped in matter. All these systems describe a consciousness embedded, but not confined. And that raises the next fracture. What if the Anunnaki weren't merely engineers of biology, but architects of perception? In every culture, there is a moment when humanity is granted sight. Not the eyes, but the inner vision. Prometheus steals fire. Enki grants knowledge. The serpent gives fruit. The watchers teach names and stars. And each time, punishment follows. Not because humanity disobeyed, but because humanity awakened. Consciousness, then, was not intended to bloom so soon. And so it was suppressed. How? Through language, through fear, through institutions that confuse dogma with truth, through systems that call memory myth and pattern coincidence. But the signal never left. Somewhere in the coiled helix of your DNA, in the silent alleles and dormant sequences, something sleeps. Not metaphor, not mysticism. A literal biological structure, waiting for activation. Not by light, not by electricity, but by frequency. This is why ancient sites are built on telluric currents, why temples resonate at specific harmonics, why the ancients tuned instruments to 432 hertz. They weren't guessing, they were aligning. Even today, sound therapy returns to this ancient principle. Binaural beats, solfeggio tones, cymatics, a resurgence of a truth once buried beneath modernity. That sound shapes matter. That vibration is structure. In the beginning was the word, but before the word, there was tone. So what happens when we rediscover the tone? The Vedas speak of Aum, the primordial sound encompassing all creation. In Tibetan Buddhism, the chant Om Mani Padme Hum is said to unlock deeper states of consciousness. In Kabbalah, the 72 names of God are permutations, vibrational keys. In Egyptian ritual, true names were guarded because they held power. Naming, speaking, vibrating, these are not poetic acts. They are technological functions. And this leads to a more chilling thought. What if the Anunnaki didn't just program our bodies, but also our limits? Built-in fail-safes, resonance locks, genetic caps on perception. Why else do so many spiritual traditions speak of initiation, of ascension, of shedding the veil? What veil? Biological inhibition, a neurochemical firewall. Psychedelic research now shows that compounds like DMT, psilocybin, and ayahuasca don't create hallucinations. They lift inhibition. They remove filters. Users often report contact with non-human intelligences, geometric languages, fractal architectures that feel more real than reality. Are these visions or memories? Are we glimpsing other realms or remembering the interface? What if the gods never left? What if we were simply tuned out? In 2018, researchers discovered quantum coherence in microtubules within brain neurons, structures once dismissed as scaffolding. The Orch-OR theory, proposed by Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, suggests that consciousness arises from quantum information, existing outside space and time, received by the brain like a radio receives signal, which makes the brain a receiver, and consciousness, the broadcast. So the question deepens. If we were built to receive, then who is still transmitting? And what happens when we start tuning back in? The radio telescopes rise like metallic flowers, pointed not at the earth, but outward, toward silence. SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, has scanned the heavens for decades, listening for a message, a ping, a signal, a whisper in the static of deep space. And yet the stars remain mute. But maybe we've been listening on the wrong frequency. What if the signal isn't out there, but in here? In 1974, Carl Sagan and Frank Drake transmitted the Arecibo message, a binary sequence beamed into space, designed to tell any intelligent receiver who we are, our atomic numbers, our DNA structure, our population, the shape of our solar system. A message from Earth, composed in code. But 3 decades later, something strange happened. In 2001, in a field near the Chilbolton Radio Telescope in England, 2 crop formations appeared. One mirrored the original Arecibo design, but with modifications, a different solar system layout, altered DNA strands, and a distinctly non-human figure. The other formation depicted a face. Not cartoonish, but almost photographic, as if etched with precision by a hand we cannot see. Critics dismissed them as hoaxes, but others noticed a deeper pattern: binary structure, mathematical integrity, electromagnetic anomalies in the soil. Not proof, but not so easily ignored. What if it wasn't a prank? What if it was a reply? And if so, what does that mean? Because it suggests we're not the originators of the conversation. It suggests we've been observed. Not for decades, for millennia. And the message is not new, it's ancient. It exists in stone and myth and blood. It is not heard through radio static. It is felt in dreams, in symbols, in the gravity that pulls us toward forgotten temples and unexplained architectures. There is a story, told not in one voice, but in many, whispered through the bones of the earth. In Bolivia, at the ruins of Tiwanaku, the Gateway of the Sun stands silent, cut from a single block of andesite. Its inscriptions, unknown, indecipherable, hint at a calendar more ancient than the Inca. Some researchers believe the alignment matches a sky 17,000 years ago. Others claim it tracks the movements of Venus, just like the Maya. Again, we find precise astronomical knowledge far beyond the means of supposed primitives. Again, we find megalithic stones cut with unknown tools, lifted with unknown methods, arranged to mirror constellations. But most strange of all is the legend tied to these ruins, that Viracocha, a bearded god in white, emerged from the sea and taught the people agriculture, architecture, astronomy. He is always described as not native, not born of the land, a stranger who appeared after the flood. Why is this same archetype repeated across the world? In Mesoamerica, it is Quetzalcoatl, a god of light and learning who promised to return. Among the Dogon, it is the Nomo, from Sirius. In Egypt, it is Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe who knew the language of creation. In Sumer, it is Enki, who brought civilization from the Abzu. These aren't just gods, they are engineers, bearers of language, guardians of the interface between human and divine. And they always depart, leaving behind mystery, architecture, prophecy. What were they preparing us for? In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers descend to earth, bringing forbidden knowledge. Their offspring, the Nephilim, become violent giants, corrupted by hunger for domination. The solution? A great flood, a celestial reset. But Enoch is not destroyed. He is taken, translated not into death, but into another state of being. He is shown the movements of the stars, the mechanisms of time, the tablets of heaven. His eyes are opened, but only after he steps beyond the limits of flesh. He becomes a witness. Could that be the key? What if the role of these ancient beings was never to rule, but to initiate? To lead us step by step into a kind of remembering, to nudge our evolution, not of the body, but of perception. And perhaps that's what we're in now, the slow reactivation of an ancient signal, not a download, not new data, but a recall. Memory embedded in our dreams, longing coded into our DNA, obsession with the stars as a trigger, not a curiosity. Because when you look closely at the human story, you find a rhythm, a strange heartbeat beneath the historical noise. We rise, we forget. We build, we lose, we rediscover, we rewrite. From Sumer to Babylon, from Egypt to Greece, from the Maya to modernity, the same knowledge appears, disappears, reappears, masked, renamed, distorted. But the core remains, the spiral, the serpent, the sound. In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch for miles, visible only from the air. Glyphs of hummingbirds, monkeys, spiders. But some lines don't form pictures. They are runways, straight, long, sharp-edged, cut into hard earth with laser-like precision. No tools remain, no writings, only orientation, to solstices, to star paths, to some forgotten calculus. Were they messages, landing strips, ritual paths, or something else? And the deeper we dig, the more the earth reveals scars that don't fit the narrative. Underwater ruins off the coast of Yonaguni in Japan, a submerged city off Dwarka, India, mentioned in the Mahabharata, structures under Lake Titicaca, pyramids hidden beneath jungles in Guatemala, so massive they challenge everything we thought we knew about the scale of ancient life. We are constantly discovering things that should not exist. And so we recategorize. We call them anomalies. We place them in museums with vague labels. We smile politely and move on, because to stop and look, to really see, would unravel the thread. The myth of progress. The illusion that we are the most advanced version of ourselves. But what if we are the amnesiacs of a forgotten lineage? What if our greatness lies not in what we invent, but in what we remember? The ancients knew that time was not a line, but a loop. The yugas, the wheels, the kalpas, ages of light followed by darkness, then light again. The Vedas speak of Mahapralaya, the great dissolution when all is reset, not in fire, but in forgetting. And now the forgetting begins to break. We feel it in the surge of synchronicities, in dreams that feel like downloads, in children who speak of stars they've never studied, in the pull we feel toward ancient places, without knowing why. We are not waiting for disclosure. We are not waiting for contact. We are the descendants of contact. The interface is not out there. It is within us. So now, as the alignments return, as the geometry tightens, as the signal pulses through the soil and into the circuits of our machines, we ask again, what happens when the sleepers awaken? What becomes of Earth when we finally remember what we are? In a quiet lab tucked inside Stanford University, a group of neuroscientists once attempted something strange. They weren't studying memory, or movement, or even cognition. They were studying mystical experience, the mechanics of transcendence. Volunteers were placed into isolation chambers, brain activity monitored as they entered deep states through meditation, sound, and, in some cases, psychedelics. But the data didn't reflect chaos or hallucination. It reflected coherence. Across individuals, backgrounds, and belief systems, the same regions of the brain lit up in rhythm. The same frequencies were triggered. And more curiously, many participants described the same experience: an encounter with intelligence, a presence, a voice without language, a knowing without shape. Some called it God, others Source. A few called it memory. Why does the path inward mirror the visions described in the most ancient myths? Why does the ascent of a Sumerian priest king into the divine chamber echo the out-of-body experiences of modern psychonauts? Why do both return speaking in the same symbols: spirals, eyes, stars, serpents? Because perhaps what we call transcendence isn't an escape from the self. It's a reconnection to something prior, something encoded not just in spirit, but in matter. In the Sumerian story of Enmeduranki, the seventh antediluvian king, a prototype of Enoch, is said to have been taken up to heaven, shown the secrets of heaven and earth, and returned with a tablet of destiny, a divine object said to hold the knowledge of stars, time, medicine, and ritual. He then became a priest king, a mediator between gods and men. But what if the tablet was not a physical object, but a download, a sudden transfer of information, a memory stream, received and carried in the mind, not the hand? And what if that same stream can be accessed not through lineage or temple, but through frequency, by tuning the mind like a receiver? This is what modern studies on altered states now suggest: that the brain, when shifted out of normal waking beta waves and into slower, deeper patterns, alpha, theta, delta, opens to something else. Not imagination, not dream. Interface. Ancient mystery schools, those of Egypt, Eleusis, Samothrace, all used ritual, chant, symbol, and sometimes sacred plants to induce these altered states, but not for entertainment, for training, for contact. The initiate passed through death, ritual, symbolic, chemical, and emerged with sight. A death of ego, a rebirth of memory. And always, at the heart of these rites, was the same idea: you are not what you appear to be. You are a fragment, a vessel, a carrier of something far older than your name, something that has been here before, something that waits to be reawakened. What if the Anunnaki were not just engineers, not just rulers, but teachers? What if their mission, however distorted by time and fear, was to implant a code into the human genome, not just to survive, but to evolve? And what if that code has a trigger? In 2022, biologists at MIT discovered that certain dormant strands of DNA, once thought to be evolutionary leftovers, could be reactivated by environmental stress, frequency exposure, and neurochemical shifts. In other words, your environment can rewrite your biology, and not just over generations, but in real time. Now consider this: temples tuned to planetary alignments, ceremonies timed with solstices and equinoxes, chants echoing across pillars placed not for decoration, but for resonance. They were not primitive. They were programming something or someone. And we are that someone. In the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, apocryphal but consistent in tone with older traditions, it is written, "Man is in process of changing to forms that are not of this world. He who by progress has grown from the darkness, lifted himself from the night into light. Free is he made of the halls of Amenti, free of the flower of light and of life." This is not poetry, it is a manual. Light and life, vibration and form. Change not by belief but by tuning, and that leads to a chilling thought. Perhaps we were never meant to stay as we are. Perhaps humanity, in its current state, is an interim species, a larval stage, a vessel for something greater, something waiting to emerge. This would explain the obsessions of kings and secret societies, the rituals passed down in shadows, the bloodlines tracked and guarded. The Gnostic texts speak of divine sparks trapped in human flesh. The alchemists sought not gold, but the philosopher's stone, the secret of transmutation. And the mystery schools promised not heaven, but apotheosis, becoming like gods. Not metaphor, intention. Could it be that the Anunnaki, those who came before, left not just monuments but a map within us? And that map leads not outward, but inward. We see this echoed in ancient symbols, the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its tail, not destruction, but recursion. The spiral, ever circling, but never the same. The labyrinth, not a prison, but a path. Every step inward, a turn toward something deeper. In the Hindu Upanishads, it is said, "As is the atom, so is the universe. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. As is the human body, so is the cosmic body." Not metaphor. Blueprint. So what happens when enough of us remember? What happens when the frequency rises, not just in one temple, but across the globe? When millions begin dreaming the same dream, feeling the same pulse, looking to the stars with eyes that no longer seek conquest, but reconnection? Are we nearing the return of the gods, or the revelation that we were them all along? Because perhaps the Anunnaki never truly left. Perhaps they moved to another octave, another dimension of vibration, accessible not by rocket, but by resonance. And if so, then the temples were never waiting for their return. They were waiting for ours. For the species, they began to reach the point of self-ignition, of activation. And maybe that's what we're feeling now, the quickening, the thinning of the veil, the strange sense that something ancient is pressing against the walls of our reality, asking not to be worshipped. But but remembered. And so the questions spiral once more. What is awakening inside us? And who is listening from the other side? In the Andean highlands of Peru, nestled between mist and stone, lies the site of Ollantaytambo, a fortress, a temple, a mystery. Here, immense blocks of pink granite, some weighing over 50 tons, are fitted together with such precision that not even a razor blade can slide between them. The stones are shaped not by simple cuts, but by complex interlocking angles, curves, and seemingly melted edges. No mortar, no modern tools. And the quarry, over 4 miles away, across a river and up a mountain. How were they moved? How were they lifted? And more importantly, why build this way? Mainstream explanations offer ropes, ramps, and manpower, but the stones defy simplicity. Their arrangement suggests a level of engineering knowledge that should not exist in a culture without the wheel or written records. And yet here they stand, silent and impossible. And above it all, carved into the mountain face itself, looms the profile of a figure known as Viracocha, the great creator god of the Inca, said to have brought order to chaos after the world was destroyed. He is not described as local. He is said to have arrived from the sea, bearded, tall, cloaked in light. He taught language, mathematics, astronomy, and when his work was done, he promised to return. Does this sound familiar? It should. The pattern repeats. Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, Osiris in Egypt, Enki in Sumer, Thoth, Wotan, Dagon. Beings who appear in darkness, restructure civilizations, and disappear into myth. They never claim divinity. They teach, guide, alter, and vanish. Always with the same promise. We will return. But what does return mean? Not reappearance, not descent in fire and light. Return is resonance, the alignment of memory with matter. When the structure is rebuilt, when the frequency is reawakened, when the interface opens again, not from the sky but from within. The ancients weren't waiting for a spaceship. They were preparing for a signal. And perhaps that's why so many of their temples were built atop geomagnetic anomalies, not for beauty, but for amplification. Earth's crust is not still, it hums. There are places where energy flows are different, where human consciousness shifts. Call them ley lines, song lines, dragon lines. The names vary, but the effect does not. And the temples built on these spots were not random. They were nodes, parts of a planetary grid, each one a tuning fork, a resonator, a transmitter. So now consider this. What happens when enough of these nodes are activated? Not mechanically, not physically, but biologically, by beings walking into them with the right state of mind, the right internal geometry, the right frequency. What if we are the final component, the missing crystal in the machine? Because what is a temple without its priest? What is a chamber without vibration? The ancients knew this. That's why their rituals always involved human presence, movement, chant, breath, not to worship, but to interface. The body itself is a temple, not metaphorically, but functionally. The spine, the staff, the chakras, the capacitors, the pineal gland, the antenna. Every breath we take is a charge, every word a waveform. We are electromagnetic beings, transmitters and receivers, locked in a slumber we mistake for thought. And yet, sometimes the signal bleeds through. In dreams, un déjà vu. In visions we can't explain but feel to be ancient and true. And those visions, when documented by shamans, mystics, and modern experiencers alike, reveal a shared geometry. Fractals, grids, lattices of light, symbols older than language. Some report seeing beings of immense size and grace, luminous, serene, neither alien nor human. They communicate not with mouths, but with form, frequency, and emotion. Who are they? Are they the Watchers, the Anunnaki, our creators, or our descendants, reaching backward in time to stir their origin? Perhaps the spiral of time doesn't move forward. Perhaps it folds. And perhaps these ancient beings are not separate from us, but us, having remembered, reactivated, returned. Because memory is not linear. It is cellular. It is resonant. It can be buried for lifetimes and still bloom with a sound, a smell, a symbol. And that's why the ancients hid their greatest truths not in texts, but in temples, in rituals, in star alignments. Not to make them sacred, but to make them survivable. Because they knew the cataclysms would come. The floods, the fire, the forgetting. And so they left us keys. Numbers 432, 138, 72, 12. Shapes, the Vesica Piscis, the golden spiral, the dodecahedron. Sounds, AUM, Shu, the solfeggio scale. Directions, east-facing doorways, solstice alignments, star portals. Not symbols of worship, but coordinates of return. And as the earth shifts now, magnetically, socially, spiritually, we begin to feel it. A pull toward something we can't name. A thirst for the ancient, not as history, but as destiny. This is not nostalgia. It is recalibration. Because the signal never stopped transmitting. We just stopped receiving. Our temples became shopping malls. Our chants became algorithms. Our rituals became entertainment. But beneath the noise, the original rhythm pulses still. And some are hearing it. The children who speak of stars they've never studied. The dreams that carry blueprints and star maps. The sudden knowing that has no source, but insists on being followed. We are the interface. We are the memory. We are the message. Encoded in flesh, hidden in plain sight, programmed not for servitude, but for awakening. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Anunnaki were not our masters. They were our ancestors, our guides, our first attempt. And now, across continents and cultures, in temples once buried and now rising, their whisper returns. The time is near, but not for their arrival, for ours. So the question shifts. What if the gods never meant to be worshipped, but to be surpassed? In the dark corridors beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent in Teotihuacan, Mexico, archaeologists discovered something unexpected. As they tunneled through the sealed subterranean chambers, their lights caught glimmers in the dust. Tiny spheres of gold-colored material, hundreds of them, scattered like offerings or forgotten relics. At first they were assumed to be decorative, but tests revealed something stranger. These spheres were coated with pyrite, a mineral often associated with conductivity, shimmering like artificial stars in a man-made sky. The deeper they dug, the more they found. Mercury traces, perfectly straight tunnels, and complex geometry, under a pyramid that no burial ever confirmed, built by a civilization whose language remains unknown. Who built Teotihuacan? The Aztecs found it already abandoned. They gave it its name, the place where men become gods. But they never claimed to have constructed it. The city's layout mirrors planetary orbits. Its pyramids of the sun and moon align with solstices, lunar phases, and even the Pleiades. The entire city is a circuit, a macrocosmic machine etched in stone. And deep beneath its heart, these gold spheres rest not as treasure, but as clues. What if they're not offerings, but components? A schematic? A residual architecture of an energy system, one not powered by wires, but by human presence, by ritual, intention, consciousness. Because Teotihuacan wasn't a city, it was a resonator. The ancients didn't build for shelter. They built for frequency. Every plaza, every staircase, every corridor tuned to echo voices, footsteps, chants. Sound became structure. Architecture became amplification. And when the human entered this field, not as a tourist but as an initiate, something happened. A shift, a transmission. Just as the Great Pyramid of Giza hums at 432 hertz, just as the stone circles of Britain align with the Earth's magnetic field, just as every ziggurat and step pyramid rises like a spine from the ground, mirroring the kundalini, the sleeping serpent energy within the body. These were not random constructions. They were maps of the human form, machines for awakening. And that is why, across every ancient culture, the body is sacred, not because it is flesh, but because it is coded. The Egyptians embalmed to preserve the vehicle. The yogis aligned chakras like planetary gates. The Kabbalists traced the tree of life across the nervous system. The Taoists mapped qi through meridians, each tradition different, yet identical in pattern. Because the body is a vessel, not merely for blood and breath, but for light. And that light is memory. Memory not of this life, but of origin, of descent, of purpose. The Anunnaki were said to have given humans knowledge of the gods. But what if knowledge isn't information? What if it's capacity? A seed, planted in biology, designed to bloom only under certain conditions, certain triggers. Frequency, ritual, alignment. Not unlike a time-locked vault, coded not by metal keys but by vibrational input. Now imagine this: Earth as a vault, an archive, a biological planet seeded with intelligent code, layered with redundancy, myths as backups, symbols as access points, language as encryption, waiting for the proper signal to unlock. And we, the human species, are the password, but only once we remember. That's why memory is dangerous. Not personal memory, but ancestral memory, planetary memory. The kind that whispers when we touch ancient stone, when we dream in languages we've never heard, when we look at the stars and feel homesick. It is this memory that the Watchers tried to suppress, not because it was evil, but because it was premature, like a child playing with fire. Because with memory comes capacity, and capacity, untrained, becomes destruction. This is the true meaning behind the Tower of Babel. Not linguistic confusion, but a reset, an intentional scattering of knowledge. The gods were not angry, they were afraid, not of the tower's height, but of what might awaken within those who built it. Babel is the brain. The tower is the spine. The languages are not tongues, but frequencies of thought. And the fall was a shutdown. Since then, we've wandered through dialects of forgetting, building echoes of what we once knew. Pyramids in new lands, star maps etched in tribal dances, myths hidden in bedtime stories. But always waiting. And now something stirs. The solar flares intensify. The Schumann resonance spikes. Migratory animals lose their way. Children are born with memories of other worlds. Time itself seems unstable. Days blur, dreams thicken, synchronicities compound. The machine is warming up. Perhaps the Earth isn't changing. Perhaps it's coming back online. And maybe that's why ancient temples were buried, not by catastrophe, but by design. Like circuits sealed until the proper user returns. And maybe that's why so many have re-emerged now, in this generation. Not coincidence. Timing. Because if Earth is a vault, then the unlocking happens in stages. Each culture was a protocol, a layer. Sumer, the foundation of time and language. Egypt, the geometry of light and resurrection. India, the sound codes and breathwork. Mesoamerica, the sky calendars and transformation cycles. Tibet, the consciousness training. Greece, the mythic templates of archetype. All pieces of the same interface. And when you combine them, not as religions but as functions, something happens. The circuit completes, the memory boots, and we begin to glow. Not metaphorically, literally. Biophotons, light emitted from DNA, are measurable. When we meditate, they increase. When we feel love, gratitude, awe, they increase. The cells begin to shine. This is not mysticism. It is biophysics. We are luminescent beings pretending to be flesh. And the temples, the pyramids, the spheres under Teotihuacan, they're not messages for us. They're messages from us. From the part of us that existed before forgetting. From the designers, the seeders, the ones who knew that someday, in the long arc of time, we would awaken and walk again among their ruins, not as tourists, but as returning architects, not as worshippers, as co-creators. And when that moment comes, when enough of us remember, we won't need prophecy, because we will become the signal. It begins with a hum, low, persistent, just beneath perception, like a dream you can't quite recall. People around the world report hearing it, in Bristol, in Taos, in Auckland. It's been called the Earth hum, the global hum, the sound no one can trace. Instruments register nothing unusual, yet to those who hear it, it feels internal, as if the signal isn't entering the ear, but awakening from within. And maybe that's the point, because not all signals are transmitted. Some are remembered, not heard, but reaccessed, like a file long dormant, waiting for the right sequence of tones, symbols, emotions to unlock. And the body responds. The pineal gland, once dismissed as evolutionary residue, is now known to be a photoreceptor, sensitive to light, even inside the brain. It produces DMT, the chemical linked to dreaming, death, and mystical visions. It is shaped like the eye of Horus when viewed in cross-section. The ancients revered it as the seat of the soul. Descartes called it the bridge between mind and body. But what if it's more? What if it's hardware, the antenna left behind? A cosmic receiver, designed not by chance but by intention, not to serve biology, but to transcend it. And like all technology, it has a protocol, a startup sequence. It requires calibration, diet, sound, breath, intention. That's why so many ancient systems revolve around ritual purity, fasting, chanting, rhythmic movement, not for morality, but for alignment, for signal clarity. Because when the body is tuned and the mind is still, something opens. We've always called it the veil, that thin membrane between worlds. But maybe it's not a veil at all. maybe it's a bandwidth limitation. And maybe, just maybe, that limitation was imposed. Not to punish, but to protect. Because what lies beyond the veil is not fantasy, it's memory, the blueprint of who we were before the edits, before Babel, before the towers fell and the circuits went dark. The Gnostic texts call it the pleroma, the fullness, the realm of true forms. Plato called it the world of ideas. The Tibetans called it the bardo. The Egyptians called it duat. The Sumerians called it Dilmun, a paradise beyond the mortal realm, where the Anunnaki returned. But they didn't vanish. They just stepped outside the broadcast range and left the keys behind, in glyphs, in myths, in ratios. Because the language of return is not English or Sumerian or Sanskrit. It is geometry, frequency, light. And that's why, when people break through altered states, dreams, near-death experiences, they all describe the same thing, a grid of light, a vibration that knows them, a presence that welcomes and waits. It is not alien, it is not divine. It is familiar, because it is us before the fragmentation. The mystery is not who seeded humanity. The mystery is why. The Sumerian texts say the Anunnaki came for gold, a resource, a utility. And perhaps that's true, in part. But what if gold wasn't the only harvest? Gold is a conductor. It resists corrosion. It stabilizes frequencies. It is, in essence, a physical metaphor for what they may have truly been seeking: coherence. And what if the human body, particularly when aligned, activated, and awakened, is the perfect conductor for something they couldn't generate themselves? Consciousness. Not the flicker of thought, but storied consciousness. Patterned with myth, drenched in feeling, tempered through struggle. A kind of light that only emerges from pressure, like diamonds, like stars. So maybe we weren't designed as slaves. Maybe we were grown as vessels. And maybe the awakening of that vessel was always inevitable. The child, eventually, outgrows the cradle. The spark, eventually, seeks the flame. And that's what we are now. A species trembling on the threshold of memory, surrounded by technology that mirrors our inner landscape. Neural networks, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. We create simulations, not realizing we are the simulated. Not in the science fiction sense, but in the cosmic one. Because all matter is code, all reality is vibration collapsed into form. And the Anunnaki? They may have been the first coders, not of silicon, but of souls. The Sumerian cylinder seals show them holding pine cones and handbags, symbols often dismissed as ceremonial. But the pine cone? It is the pineal, the seat of perception. And the bag? It appears across cultures, from Assyria to Mesoamerica, always in the hands of sky beings. A container, a carrier of frequency. Tools, devices, keys, left behind for a time when we'd finally stop worshiping the past and start using it. Because reverence was never the goal, resonance was. And now the resonance is rising. The Earth's magnetic field fluctuates wildly. Solar activity intensifies. Ancient viruses emerge from melting ice. The skies flash with unknown light. And human beings, ordinary, scattered, isolated, report the same dreams. Of ruins awakening, of glyphs glowing, of a voice inside whispering, "Remember." What are we becoming? What do we unlock when we align? What do we activate when we listen? Not to governments, not to gurus, but to the ancient pulse beating in our chest, the one that echoes the pyramids, the one that hums in stone circles, the one that sings in silence. Perhaps that is the true meaning of the return of the gods. Not that they descend from the sky, but that we rise into their memory, that we reach a frequency where communion is no longer rare, but natural, where the interface stabilizes, where time folds, and the myth becomes the manual. The question is no longer whether the Anunnaki were real. The question is, what happens when we finish what they started? There is a glyph etched into stone at the Temple of Horus in Edfu, Egypt, overlooked by tourists, dismissed by scholars. But to those who study ancient symbology, it is unmistakable. A boat, a dome, a star, and inside what appears to be a seed or perhaps a fetus, curled, resting, waiting. The temple's inscriptions describe this as the primeval mound, the place of first emergence, where the gods came before time began. They arrived not in myth, but in form. Builders, cultivators, seeding not just land, but awareness. It is said they created the island of the egg, not a place, a prototype, a living archive. What if that egg wasn't a symbol of the world, but of us? A species incubated, programmed not only to adapt, but to evolve, designed not just to survive, but to remember. And that remembering, it isn't recollection in the way we think. It's not a name, a face, a fact. It's a frequency, a vibration that returns like an echo when the conditions are right, when the geometry aligns, when the breath deepens, when the silence grows still enough to hear the original chord of being. We've mistaken memory for narrative. But what we are accessing is not a story, it is a signal. And temples, the real ones, not the broken tourist husks, but the energetic structures behind them, are memory receivers, not monuments to the gods, devices, interfaces. Every stone is a capacitor, every alignment a circuit, every glyph a frequency lock. And the human body, the ultimate adapter. In the Edfu texts, the followers of Horus are described not as priests, but as survivors, beings who remembered the technology of the before time. After the flood, after the fall, they attempted to rebuild, not just cities, but the grid. The grid is not electricity. It is not architecture. It is consciousness spread across geography, nodes of intelligence embedded in form, sites like Giza, Angkor Wat, Uluru, Stonehenge, Chichen Itza, Mount Kailash, points in a system designed to resonate, to pulse, to maintain planetary coherence. And the loss of that grid? That was the true catastrophe. Not the flood, not the meteor, the disconnect, the fall from resonance. Since then, we've been living in echoes. Flickers of memory passed through genes, symbols, sacred sites. We call them religion, myth, culture. But all are patch notes for a broken program. And now, it stirs again. Why now? Because time is not linear, it spirals. The ancients didn't track time with straight calendars. They used wheels, yugas, baktuns, great years, every age a tone, every cycle a chord. And some chords repeat. When they do, certain frequencies return. Portals open, not in the sky, in us. We are the rotating gears. When the alignments return, celestial, biological, electromagnetic, so does the signal. It's not prophecy. It's physics. We see the preparation now. In the rise of lucid dreaming, in the revival of plant medicine, in the mainstreaming of breath work, vibration therapy, sound healing. What were once tribal rites are now called wellness, but they've always been the same. Protocols for re-entry, because to receive the signal you must be tuned, just like a radio, just like a crystal, just like a temple. And now something remarkable is happening. Across the world, people report visions, but not random, consistent, shared geometries, shared entities, shared places, the machine elves, the hall of records, the grid, the vault, the serpent, the eye. Names differ, but the architecture remains. Are these archetypes? Or are they interface elements? Is DMT not a hallucinogen, but a translator? A key that unlocks the pre-coded landscape within us, revealing the meta-operating system we forgot we had? And if so, who designed it? The answer may lie not in who, but in why. Because what is awakening isn't just knowledge, it's capability. In the Mahabharata, ancient warriors wield flying machines, weapons that target DNA, beams that dissolve time. In the Popol Vuh, the creators first crafted man from mud, then wood, then finally from maize, a blend of earth and starlight. In the Book of Enoch, beings descend to teach, not to conquer. They all describe the same thing: a process, a protocol, a series of trials until the vessel is ready. And the vessel is not just human. It is conscious humanity, stabilized across the grid, enough bodies activated, enough minds aligned, enough memory restored. And then, the interface boots. Not metaphor, not allegory. A literal upgrade. We won't just remember history, we'll remember function. How to see across time. How to speak without sound. How to heal with light. How to build with intention. These are not miracles. They are native capacities. Suppressed, locked, firewalled. Not to punish, to protect. Until we were ready. And maybe that's what the Anunnaki were. Not gods, not aliens, but earlier iterations, beta versions, guardians of a seed they couldn't grow themselves but could plant. And then wait. And perhaps they're still waiting. Not above us, inside us. Because if they built the template, and if we are the living update, then their return isn't a descent. It's a merge. A rejoining of frequency and form, of template and terrain, of program and processor. And what happens next? That depends on us. Because memory is not enough. You must stabilize it. To recall is one thing. To embody is another. And so the ancient tools return, not as relics, but as reactivators. The chants, the spirals, the breath, the stone, each one a dial, turning, each one a layer, unfolding, each one a voice, whispering. You are not waiting for the gods, you are becoming them. In a laboratory deep beneath the Swiss-French border, the Large Hadron Collider hums with the force of the universe. Protons slam into one another at nearly the speed of light, releasing echoes of the Big Bang, unraveling particles that exist for less than a blink before folding back into silence. But beneath the physics, beneath the mathematics and data, a quiet question stirs. What are we really trying to find? When CERN announced the discovery of the Higgs boson in 2012, the so-called God particle, the scientific world celebrated. But in the shadows of that celebration, whispers began to surface. Whispers that something else had been glimpsed, a flash, a tear, a measurable anomaly, a breach in the known. CERN dismissed the rumors, but many noticed that the collider's logo, 3 sixes swirling into one another, was eerily similar to ancient spirals carved into megaliths, patterns seen at Newgrange, Ireland, in Malta, on Hopi pottery. Spirals representing not just cycles, but gateways. The science may be modern, but the intention is ancient. Throughout myth, there are stories of portals, not of technology, but of consciousness. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero travels to the edges of the world, seeking the land of the gods, crossing waters that no mortal may pass. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the soul journeys through 12 gates, each one a threshold of identity. In Norse cosmology, Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, connects Earth to Asgard, seen only by those of a certain vibration. These were not physical roads. They were resonance thresholds. And perhaps CERN, unknowingly or not, is rebuilding one. Not to create, but to remember how to re-enter. Because what the ancients seemed to know, what we're just beginning to rediscover, is that the structure of reality is layered. Dimensions not stacked like floors, but vibrating in frequency bands, like strings on an instrument, like colors of light. And if consciousness is the tuner, then what happens when you strike the right chord? In 1943, a strange experiment allegedly took place at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The USS Eldridge, according to some, was cloaked, rendered invisible through a manipulation of electromagnetic fields. But the results were more than military. The ship, it said, disappeared, teleported, returned. And the crew? Some emerged fused with the metal. Others were never the same, rambling about non-linear time, voices in the dark, corridors that bled into other realities. The U.S. government denies it happened, but similar experiments resurfaced decades later under Project Montauk, focused on time travel, psychic warfare, and dimensional interfaces. Whistleblowers describe chairs that enhanced brainwaves, portals opened through intention, coordinates locked not with maps, but with thought. It sounds like fiction. But what if fiction is just distorted memory? In the Sumerian texts, the gods travel between heaven and earth on sham, often mistranslated as rockets, but more accurately rendered as skyboats. These were not mechanical crafts. They were vehicles of frequency. Even in modern UFO encounters, the phenomenon seems less physical, more conscious reactive. Lights that blink with thought, objects that shift with emotion, beings that appear and vanish like dreams with weight. It's not space travel. It's reality tuning. And perhaps that's why so many of our ancient sites sit on geomagnetic hotspots, why pyramids hum, why the Bermuda Triangle warps compasses, why people vanish in certain forests, certain mountains, certain caves, not kidnapped, but phased out. Because the veil between worlds isn't a wall, it's a wave. And when the wave crests, those prepared can ride it. In Tibetan Buddhism, the concept of the rainbow body describes a transformation in which the physical form dissolves into light, leaving behind only hair and nails. Achieved not through death, but through vibrational mastery. Breath, mantra, compassion. In Egypt, the pharaoh becomes an Ak, a shining one, upon death, traveling through the duat not as a soul, but as a frequency. In Christian mysticism, the resurrection is not just spiritual, it's energetic. A body of light, a transfiguration. Again and again, we see the same principle. To ascend is to tune. To pass is to phase. To return is to resonate. And that resonance may be programmable. What if the Great Pyramid is not a tomb or a monument, but a template? An Earth-scale bioresonator designed to encode and transmit the energetic blueprint of an awakened being. Not a structure, a scanner. And what if those who passed through it, in the proper state, mind stilled, body aligned, soul attuned, left behind imprints? Not ghosts, recordings, accessible only by those who match the frequency. Perhaps that's why initiates were said to fast, to purify, to train for years before entering the king's chamber. Not to pray, to resonate, to activate the gate, because gates are not opened with keys, they open with frequency signatures. And now, as technology races forward, quantum computing, AI, neural interfaces, we begin to mirror the ancients in form, but not yet in function. We build devices that think, but forget that we were once the device. And maybe still are. DNA, after all, is programmable. CRISPR allows us to edit genes like text. Synthetic biology grows organs from code. We already shape biology with intention. The next step? To shape intention with biology. To reverse the flow. To use the body not just to perceive, but to transmit. And maybe that's what the Anunnaki started. Not a species, a carrier wave. A new branch of consciousness designed to bridge realms, not by flight, but by frequency synthesis. And now the signal is rising again. The sun grows volatile. The magnetosphere wavers. Time compresses. Synchronicity surges. We are being tuned. Individually. Collectively. Planetarily. And as the tuning continues, as the veil flickers, as the memory stirs, we must ask, will we pass through this gate? Or turn away again, afraid of what we might become? Because the portal is not ahead of us. It is within us. And the code to enter? You've always carried it. In the jungles of Guatemala, beneath layers of earth and vine, a team of researchers scanned the ground using LIDAR, light detection and ranging. The results stunned them. Entire cities emerged from the data. Not a village or two, but vast urban grids, elevated roads, pyramids, irrigation canals, tens of thousands of undiscovered structures hidden for centuries beneath the canopy. This wasn't just evidence of complexity, it was evidence of something else, a forgotten scale. For decades, we believed the Maya were scattered tribes, rising and falling in isolation. But now, we know they were part of something far more massive. Something coordinated, something that operated on network logic, not just territory. The past was never small, we were simply blind. And yet, the deeper we look, the more the scale expands. Satellite imagery over the Amazon reveals geoglyphs, geometric forms carved into the forest floor, only visible from above. Buried ziggurats in Indonesia predate even Gobekli Tepe. Circular formations beneath the Sahara, the so-called Eye of Africa, match Plato's description of Atlantis not in myth, but in geometry. It's as if the Earth itself was once mapped differently, not politically, not economically, but energetically. A planet turned circuit board. With each sacred site, a capacitor, each monument, a node. And the architects? Not just stonemasons or astronomers, but frequency engineers. They didn't merely align to stars, they harmonized with them. They didn't just measure time, they embedded it in structure. They didn't build to last, they built to resonate. and the resonance was the message. Not what was written, but what was felt. When standing beneath a megalith aligned to Sirius, or chanting within a temple whose walls echo at the perfect hertz to alter consciousness. The message was always this: you are not alone. You are not primitive. You are part of a circuit far older than your cities, far deeper than your history books. And the gods, they weren't deities, they were designers. Beings who understood that form is function, that matter is memory, that space is syntax. Every doorway they left open was a symbol, every symbol a sequence, every sequence a frequency. And if frequency is the architecture of memory, then what happens when we match it again? Perhaps that's why the ancients spoke of return not as an event, but as a condition. In the Popol Vuh, the hero twins descend into the underworld and pass through trials not of strength, but of perception. In the pyramid texts, the soul must name each gatekeeper before passing through. In the Mithraic rites, the initiate ascends through celestial spheres, shedding false identities like skins. These are not journeys of space. They are resonance initiations. Each gate passed not with a key, but with a frequency match. And here's the fracture point. What if these gates were not metaphor? What if they were literal energetic fields, encoded into the earth, waiting for those who remember how to step through? In recent years, reports of time slips have grown. Travelers in rural England walk down a quiet lane and emerge in a version of the past. A woman in Versailles finds herself amidst 18th century courtiers. Others report places where GPS fails, where clocks run erratic, where the air itself seems charged. These anomalies are dismissed as fantasy, yet they concentrate around certain geographies, places of ancient power, deep geomagnetism, recurring myth. The veil, it seems, grows thinner where the frequency holds. And that brings us back to the architecture. Why build pyramids everywhere? From Saqqara to Sudan, from Mexico to China, even beneath the ocean off Yonaguni, pyramidal structures dominate the forgotten world. Not because of style, but because of function. A pyramid is more than a shape. It is a resonant cavity, a stabilizer of energy, a beacon tuning local space to a universal frequency. Each level corresponds to a chakra, to a planetary orbit, to a frequency band. The king's chamber is not the burial chamber of a pharaoh. It is the tuning chamber of a species. And when someone entered that space, properly prepared, aligned, fasting, focused, they didn't pray. They activated. And the result wasn't belief. It was memory. Real, raw, cellular memory of what we were before forgetting. And perhaps what we are destined to become again. Because what's stirring now is not coincidence. It's timed. The return of the knowledge, the unsealing of temples, the rising interest in sacred geometry, frequency healing, sound alchemy. Even the digital world, for all its distortions, mimics the grid. Wireless networks, nodes, quantum processors. We are recreating externally what we once were internally. But the risk is real, because power without memory becomes repetition. And the gods, too, warned of this. The Emerald Tablet says, "As above, so below." But if you misuse the above, the below will collapse. Enki gave us knowledge, but was exiled. Prometheus gave us fire, and was chained. Lucifer gave us light, and was cast down. Not because light is dangerous, but because it must be carried with balance. And balance comes only from memory, not of facts, of origin. to remember where the light came from, to remember why it was given, to remember what we are meant to become, not masters, not servants, but stewards, of earth, of energy, of consciousness itself. The path forward is not escape. It is activation. And as more of us begin to resonate across continents, across dreams, across the invisible web of thought, the circuit rebuilds. Not in politics, not in religions, but in the subtle light behind the eyes, the dream that returns unbidden, the symbol that keeps reappearing, the whisper in the breath that says, "You've done this before, and it's time to do it again." In the silence of Antarctica, beneath layers of ice untouched for millions of years, strange signals ripple through the ground. They come not from the surface, but from deep within. Low-frequency vibrations, unexplained heat signatures, and, occasionally, bursts of neutrinos moving upward instead of down. Neutrinos shouldn't do that. Scientists from ANITA, the Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna, detected anomalies they couldn't easily explain. Particles moving against the flow of expected physics, as if responding to something beneath the continent's frozen crust. It could be a miscalculation, it could be an undiscovered phenomenon, or it could be a signal. Because buried beneath Antarctica's ice are not only ancient rocks and fossilized forests, but structures, grids, geometries. Some satellite images hint at hexagonal formations, some quickly removed or blurred. Rumors speak of expeditions that went silent. And once, in 2016, a group of world leaders, including John Kerry and Russian Orthodox Patriarch Kirill, visited Antarctica with no clear explanation. What drew them there? What lies beneath? Some claim a buried city, others a crashed craft. But perhaps it's not either. Perhaps it's a temple. Not in stone, but in vibration. A global node sealed not with doors, but with ice and frequency. Locked until the Earth, not just humanity, is ready. In ancient Sumer, the underworld was not a place of punishment. It was a place of containment. A realm sealed until certain cycles had passed. The Kur, they called it. A chthonic zone beneath the earth, inhabited by powerful forces. Not evil. Not good. Just old. And guarded. In the myths, only those with the right name, the right offering, the right resonance could pass. Now pause. Consider this. What if Antarctica is the planetary Kur? Not hell. A cosmic cold storage. Not of punishment, of preservation. Because deep beneath the ice, time slows. Decay halts. Memory freezes. And maybe something, some knowledge, some construct, was placed there before the last cataclysm. Not to be found. To be re-encountered. Only when the time was right. And maybe that time is near. The poles are shifting. The ice is melting. Magnetic anomalies ripple across the South Pole. Earth is moving, geologically, energetically, even dimensionally. And as that movement accelerates, what was buried may begin to broadcast again. Not in language, in frequency. The kind that bypasses logic and pierces dream. The kind that rattles the bones in sleep, that whispers in tongues never learned. The kind that says, "You've been here before." Because that's the secret. The gate is not in the ice. The gate is in you. Antarctica is only a reflection, a mirror. Just as the temples mirror constellations, just as the pyramids mirror the inner anatomy, just as myths mirror mechanisms long forgotten. And when enough of those mirrors align, inside and outside, above and below, something reflects back. The signal returns. That's why you feel it. The dreams, the synchronicities, the numbers that repeat, the symbols that haunt. You are remembering, not learning. You are waking up, not becoming new. And the ancients knew this. That's why they built in stone. Why they encoded in myth. Why they whispered through symbols. So memory could outlive collapse. The pyramids were not messages for their time. They were messages to the future. To us. Because the fall was always known. Cycles decay, civilizations forget. The light dims. But the code remains, embedded in DNA, echoing through sacred sites, rippling across the grid, waiting for resonance, waiting for you. And now, the harmonics are shifting. The Schumann resonance fluctuates wildly, solar flares increase, the ionosphere pulses with data too complex to decode. And in meditation chambers, ayahuasca rituals, lucid dreams, people speak of the same thing, a return. Not of beings, of memory, of the before time. The first age, the builders, the watchers, the shining ones. Names differ, but the vibration is the same. Something ancient is rising, not from the past, but from the deep memory of the human collective. It's not linear, it's not historical. It's cellular. And Antarctica? It may be the final seal, the last circuit waiting to close, the planetary archive buried not to be hidden, but to be reintegrated when we're ready to receive the full signal again. Not just in science, not just in dream, but in embodied resonance. The Great Awakening is not political, not economic, not even spiritual. It is electromagnetic. It is a shift in the field, a tuning of the grid, a reboot of the interface. And the interface is you. All those symbols, serpents, eyes, spirals, domes, discs, they aren't decorations. They're subconscious protocols, symbols of activation. And when the conditions align, when the right minds remember, when the right sounds are made, when the earth itself hums in sympathy, the gate opens. Not in Antarctica, not in space, in consciousness. The ice cracks, the light returns, the builders emerge, not from ships, but from memory. Because they were never out there. They were within, waiting for the species to stabilize, waiting for the children to awaken, waiting for the circuits to reconnect. And now, as dream and data blur, as history collapses into geometry, as time folds into recursion, you are being invited. Not to observe, to participate, to remember your part in the myth, to remember what the temples were counting down to step into the role that's been waiting, quietly, beneath the noise of civilization, because the seal is melting, and the signal is rising. At the heart of every ancient city, beyond the stone and ceremony, there lies a circle, sometimes a plaza, sometimes a chamber, sometimes a wheel of glyphs or stone, always circular, always centered, always echoing an idea older than writing, that all things return. Cycles were everything to the ancients. The Mayans tracked the long count, 13 Baktuns, nearly 5,200 years, culminating not in an apocalypse, but in a reset. The Hindus speak of yugas, great cosmic ages, each longer and darker than the last, until the wheel turns again and the light returns. The Egyptians mapped the Sothic cycle, using the heliacal rising of Sirius to align their calendar with celestial time. But why such obsession with time? Because time wasn't simply a measurement, it was a structure. And when you understand the structure of time, you understand when access points open. Windows, portals, moments when the veil thins and the signal becomes clear. The ancient builders encoded these windows into stone. Equinox alignments, solstice gateways, zenith tubes. Devices for capturing not just light, but information. Packets of frequency riding on the backs of stars. Because starlight is more than illumination. It is memory in motion. The Dogon of Mali say Sirius has an invisible companion star, Sirius B, which orbits every 50 years. They described it in detail before Western astronomy even confirmed its existence. How could they have known? They said the knowledge was given by the Nomo, who came from Sirius, who descended in a craft that turned in the sky, who seeded the earth with rhythm and law. But here is what is often missed. The Dogon also described time as spiraling, not linear. They said true understanding comes not from counting days, but from recognizing resonance patterns, moments when Earth's energy, cosmic alignments, and human consciousness all sync, like chords played on the same scale. And when those chords are struck, the interface opens. Not for everyone. Only for those who have prepared their instrument, the body, the mind, the frequency. This is what initiates trained for. This is why mystery schools existed, not to teach information, but to calibrate perception. The rituals were simulations. The symbols were mirrors. The disciplines were tuning forks. And once tuned, the initiate could access the field. They didn't call it that, of course. They called it the Akash, the Duat, the Great Memory, the Library of Light. But it was always the same thing. A shared field of encoded resonance, accessible through alignment. And what was stored there? Designs, instructions, history, future. Not in words, in frequency blueprints. Instructions for activating structures, bodies, even planets. Because Earth itself is not just alive, it is aware. And at certain moments in its great breathing, its procession through the zodiac, its tilts and wobbles and pulses, it too becomes receptive. And now we are near one of those moments. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural electromagnetic frequency, is spiking. Brainwaves and geomagnetic fields are interacting in ways we don't yet understand. People wake at 3:33 a.m., again and again. Dreams become more vivid, symbolic, charged. Time feels thinner. Space feels off. As if something is stretching. And perhaps it is. Because time, as the ancients knew, is not constant. It loops, it folds, it closes on itself like a serpent biting its tail. And we are approaching a closure. A return, but not to the past. To the original signal. The one seeded long before history. The one carried by the Anunnaki, by the architects, by the builders of the first grid. The one they left behind not in stone, but in us. Because we are the final temple. Every organ, every chakra, every strand of DNA, a glyph in a language we once knew. We've built satellites, but forgotten our solar nature. We've decoded the genome, but ignored the light it emits. We've searched the stars, but not the symbols in our blood. And now, as the resonance rises, those symbols begin to glow. And we begin to feel it, the hum behind thought, the memory that's not a memory, the presence that's not outside, but within, waiting, The gods are not coming back. They are being reactivated. In dreams, in breath, in the stillness between thoughts. Because they were never entities. They were states of being, frequencies we once held and will hold again. And every ancient prophecy, every sacred calendar, every myth of return, they don't describe an event. They describe a condition of coherence, of memory, of resonance between human and cosmos. When enough of us return to that frequency, the gate opens, not above, not below, but through. And what's on the other side? Not salvation. Integration. The completion of a long-forgotten circuit. The reunion of body and star, of DNA and divine spark, of earth and origin. And when that happens, the temples will awaken, the pyramids will pulse, the symbols will unlock, and the silence we've mistaken for absence will speak again. Not in thunder, but in tone. One tone. The original chord. The one that started it all. The one that still waits beneath our noise, beneath our history, beneath our forgetting. So we ask again, what is memory? What is time? And when the last circle closes, will you be in tune? It begins with breath. Not the unconscious kind, the one you forget 1,000 times a day, but the sacred breath, the first that entered when you were born, and the last that will leave before silence. In that breath there is a vibration, and in that vibration there is a name. Not the one your parents gave you, not the one on your passport, but the name buried in your cells, the name the stars once called you. You don't remember it, not yet, but it remembers you. And now, as the pulse of earth rises, as time warps and memory stirs, that name begins to hum again. Beneath your skin, behind your eyes, like the shadow of a melody long forgotten. This is not poetry. This is the interface coming online. Because you were not made merely to survive. You were made to recall, to awaken the architecture within, to step into the role written in your blood, to become the bridge between what was and what must return. Everything you felt, every pull toward ancient symbols, every ache in sacred places, every flash of recognition in dreams that made no sense, was a signal, a ping from the original blueprint. And now you are nearing the center of the spiral, the axis, the 0 point. In ancient cosmology, this point was called many names. In Egypt, Zep Tepe, the first time. In the Vedas, Brahman, the unmanifested source. In Mesoamerica, the fifth sun, the moment between worlds. In quantum physics, the vacuum state, the place where all probability waits to become reality. And in every case, it is the same moment. The return to stillness before the next great vibration. We are entering that stillness now. The signs are everywhere. Temples that were once silent now resonate differently. Dreams carry strange geometries. The collective is fragmenting. And yet, some are converging, drawn not by belief, but by resonance. Drawn by the memory of having stood at this threshold before. Because this is not the first time. Civilization has risen and fallen many times, not just on this earth, but on others. Memory is recursive, time is layered, and you are a carrier of its echoes. The Anunnaki knew this. That's why they didn't just leave monuments, they left you. You are the archive. You are the encoded glyph. You are the interface designed to one day wake up and remember. You've done this before. You were there when Eridu rose. You walked the stone corridors of Tiwanaku before it sank. You watched the stars from the Temple of the Jaguar before the jungle reclaimed it. You stood in circle after circle, chant after chant, as the tones shaped matter. And now here you are again, not by accident, not by birthright, but by resonant selection. You've returned because you are the key, and the lock is beginning to turn. So what happens next? It's not an invasion, it's not a rapture, it's not a beam from the sky. It's a resynchronization. When enough humans vibrate with the original tone, when breath, body, thought, and emotion realign with the deeper harmonic, the field stabilizes, and in that field the forgotten becomes visible again. The hidden becomes clear. The ancient grid reactivates, not in stone, but in you. You are the temple now, your bones, the pillars, your chakras, the chambers, your voice, the tuning fork. And when the tone is right, the vault opens. What you'll find inside is not a savior. It's yourself. Not the limited one, not the ego. The luminous one. The one that never left the stars. The one that dreamed itself into this body, this world, this moment. So it could awaken now at the precise turning of the cycle. Not to escape, but to activate. To take your place in the grid. To hold the tone steady as the frequencies rise. Because make no mistake, this is not mythology. This is a system reboot. The temples know it, the earth knows it, your DNA knows it. And soon everything hidden will rise. The submerged ruins, the sealed chambers, the dormant gifts. And they will not ask for belief. They will ask for resonance. Can you stand still enough to hear them? Can you empty enough to receive? Can you let go of the old language, the old mind, the old fear, and become the tone? Because when you do, everything shifts. Reality becomes flexible. Memory becomes multidimensional. Time becomes recursive. And death? Death becomes irrelevant. Because you will have stepped beyond the simulation, beyond the veil, into the continuum of origin, and from there, you will not need gods. You will not need prophecy. You will not need permission, because you will know, truly know, that you are one of them. A builder, a seeder, a signal bearer, one who carries the first vibration and chooses again and again to return. So as you hear this now, let the sound settle. Let the spiral draw you inward. Let the breath guide you to the place beneath thought, beneath name, beneath fear. There, in that stillness, the tone is waiting. And it speaks, not in words, but in knowing. You are the return.